My father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We're not going to waste a perfectly good Thursday night watching you collect a pin." Then he reached for the television remote like he'd just mentioned the weather outside, like he'd commented on the color of the curtains, like those words, dismissing 18 years of work, were barely worth the breath it took to say them. That was a Thursday. 72 hours later, I stood alone inside a ceremony hall at Fort Meade, Maryland, in full dress blues, staring at two perfectly empty chairs sitting in the dead center of the middle row, while everyone around me pressed into their families like the world might end if they let go. I want to tell you something about military ceremonies that nobody thinks to mention. They all carry the same smell. Doesn't matter the base, doesn't matter the branch, doesn't matter the decade. Burnt coffee from the foyer urn that nobody cleaned properly. Floor wax applied the night before by someone who cared more about shine than scent. Cheap floral perfume from aunts who got dressed up for the occasion. Starch baked deep into freshly pressed uniforms. Spend enough years in uniform, and your body starts recognizing that combination before your brain even wakes up. It's the smell of something that matters. The room that morning was alive in the way only military ceremony rooms get. Proud fathers standing a little straighter than usual. Mothers with photographs already out on their phones. Grandchildren climbing the folding chairs like jungle gyms, completely indifferent to the occasion. One older gentleman near the aisle, suspenders tight over his dress shirt, was already crying, and not a single word had been spoken yet. And there I stood, 37 years old, 18 years in uniform, about to pin on the gold oak leaves of a major in the United States Army after spending nearly 2 decades clawing my way from enlisted intelligence analyst all the way up to Pentagon operations. Completely alone. Well, almost. My neighbor Marcus had come. 71 years old, retired Army Master Sergeant, walked with a cane he described as his third leg, complained about his left knee every single time Maryland decided to rain, which in that state is roughly every other day. He sat near the back of the room with a large paper coffee cup in his hand, and the moment I walked through the door, he gave me one slow nod. That nod nearly undid me more than the empty chairs did, because at least one person thought it was worth showing up. I kept glancing toward the entrance anyway. Couldn't stop myself. Some small, stupid, persistent part of me kept expecting my parents to push through those doors 10 minutes late, waving apologetically, embarrassed but there. They weren't coming, I knew that, of course I knew that. Colonel Ruiz stood beside me near the staging area before the ceremony began. He kept his voice low. "You doing all right, Callahan?" "Absolutely, sir." That's the Army answer. Doesn't matter if your life is actively burning to the ground around you. You say absolutely because you learned that word carries authority and reveals nothing. He studied me for a second longer than felt comfortable. Then he said quietly, "You earned this rank." 3 words, simple enough to put on a bumper sticker. But I nearly lost my composure standing right there on that stage because nobody in my family had ever once talked to me that way. Not once in 37 years. In my parents' house, achievement always arrived with a condition stapled to it. My younger brother Danny bought a second-hand boat with money he'd scraped together from 3 different loans, and my father called him a sharp businessman. I came back from 12 months in Afghanistan and my mother said, "Well, at least you weren't infantry." Danny launched an auto detailing company that lasted 8 months before collapsing, and my father called him entrepreneurial. I finished officer candidate school while working overnight shifts and recovering from a deployment injury that still aches in cold weather, and my mother said, "You were always so stubborn." Nothing I ever accomplished counted completely. There was always a footnote. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock sharp. National anthem. Opening remarks. Names called alphabetically while families clapped and whistled, and some people straight up wept. A grandmother near the front had brought flowers so enormous the poor lieutenant receiving them could barely see over them. Then they called my name. Captain Alina Callahan, soon to be Major. My legs carried me forward on muscle memory alone, and that's when I saw them again, those 2 empty chairs. Middle row, perfect sightline to the podium, the 2 most visible vacant seats in the entire room. I thought suddenly about the last school event my parents attended for me. My high school graduation back in Harrington, Ohio. Summer of 2004. My father complained the folding chairs hurt his back. My M. Others spent most of the ceremony whispering to the woman, beside her, about Danny's baseball tournament, scheduled for the following weekend. 22 years ago, and here we were, still in the same story. Colonel Ruiz pinned the gold oak leaves onto my uniform with careful, deliberate hands. "You make this army proud," he said. People clapped. Marcus let out a whistle so sharp from the back row that a few heads turned. I smiled because when people are watching you, that's what you do. But underneath it, something just felt tired. Not angry, I'd gone past anger somewhere around the drive to the base that morning. This was something duller, something chronic. You know how certain injuries stop being sharp over time and just become part of the background noise? That's what it felt like emotional arthritis. It didn't stab anymore, it just ached. After the ceremony, families gathered outside near the flag display. Phones out, arms around shoulders, someone in the parking lot popping a bottle of champagne that I was fairly certain violated at least 4 base regulations. I stood near the entrance holding a small cardboard box containing my old captain's rank insignia, not entirely sure what to do with my hands. Marcus shuffled over beside me, cane tapping the pavement. "Your people really didn't show." I shook my head. "To hell with them," he muttered. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded paper napkin from a fast food bag. Apparently, I had started crying at some point without noticing. That made me laugh, actual laughter. "Don't apologize for being a human being," he said gruffly when I started to. "Very Marcus." A young lieutenant walked past with his wife and their small daughter, who was maybe 4 years old and covered in cupcake frosting. The little girl spotted my uniform, stopped walking, and raised a solemn, sticky-fingered salute. I saluted back with everything I had. Then I got in my car and sat in the parking garage for almost 40 minutes, engine off, collar loose, the new gold oak leaf insignia turned over in my palm. Major Alina Callahan. The 19-year-old version of me would have sobbed hearing that. I enlisted originally because I needed to get out of Harrington before the smallness of it swallowed me whole. I still remembered my recruiter's office, buzzing fluorescent lights, army posters hanging slightly crooked on the walls. He asked why I wanted to join. I almost told him the truth, because nobody at home sees me as someone worth seeing. Instead, I said I was looking for a challenge. Sitting there in that parking garage, I opened my phone and found my mother's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long time, long enough that my hand started shaking slightly, not dramatically, just that low, quiet tremor that shows up when your body understands something your mind hasn't quite caught up to yet. I understood something in that moment. I had spent years, decades, waiting for people who had already decided who I was back when I was 17. To them, I was never the accomplished one, never the important one, just the difficult daughter who chose the army over settling down nearby and making herself convenient for everyone else. I pressed delete. Her number disappeared from my screen. And in that quiet concrete garage with fluorescent lights humming overhead, I spoke aloud to no one in particular. I guess this one was just for me. 6 weeks later, a photograph appeared in the Washington Post. I wasn't even the focus of the image. A senior defense official stood at the podium speaking about infrastructure threats during a Pentagon cybersecurity briefing. I was off to the side in uniform, reviewing documents, 2 armed security personnel visible in the background. That was it, one photograph, barely worth a second glance if you didn't know who was in it. But in Harrington, Ohio, that photograph might as well have been a moon landing. Old church acquaintances started calling my parents. Neighbors who hadn't acknowledged my existence in a decade suddenly remembered they knew me. People who used to smile past me at family gatherings began sharing the article on their social media pages. Then, almost 2 weeks after the image ran, my phone rang on a Tuesday night. Unknown Ohio area code. I picked up anyway. My mother's voice came through warm as fresh honey. "Honey, why didn't you tell us you were doing something so important?" I should have hung up the moment I recognized her voice. That's the honest truth of it. Not because I hated her. Hatred would have been far simpler. What I actually felt was messier than that, because even at 37 years old, standing in my own kitchen in my own apartment, part of me still desperately wanted to hear her sound proud of me without there being an angle attached. The ladies at St. Catherine's haven't stopped talking about that newspaper photo, she continued. There it was. Not how are you, not we're so pro. Ud of what you've built. Not even a passing acknowledgement of the promotion ceremony they'd skipped. Straight to the audience reaction. I leaned back against my kitchen counter and stared out the window at the rain dragging across the glass. Someone below was walking a golden retriever through the drizzle with a grocery bag held over their head. Mom, I said carefully, it was just a press briefing. Well, apparently it wasn't just a press briefing, she laughed softly. Your father has been showing that article to everyone. That sentence nearly made me choke. My father, the same man who called my promotion ceremony a waste of an evening, now walking around Harrington acting like I'd been appointed to the Joint Chiefs. Her voice shifted then into a register I knew too well, that particular brand of casual that isn't casual at all. We'd really love for you to come home for a few days. Your father misses you. No, he didn't, but I let her finish. She talked about church friends, about Danny's children asking about their aunt from the newspaper, about how impressed the neighborhood had been. Every sentence in the conversation orbited the same sun, other people's impressions of me, never once her own. There's a difference between someone being proud of you and someone being proud of what you make them look like. I understood that difference long before that phone call, but hearing it laid out so plainly still managed to sit heavy in my chest long after we said goodbye. I poured old coffee from the morning pot and stood in my socks staring at the Pentagon briefing photograph pulled up on my laptop screen. It wasn't anything special. Me in uniform, papers in hand, two security officers in the background, but in old Catholic neighborhoods where everyone quietly kept score of everyone else's life, who divorced, who drank, who failed, whose children moved away and never came back, I had apparently become useful. That realization was not a comfortable one. 3 days later, Danny texted me for the first time in nearly 9 months. Hey sis, proud of you, need to ask a small favor when you come home. I stared at the message until my phone screen dimmed. Then a second message arrived. Nothing major, just some business advice. I laughed out loud, not happy laughter, the kind that escapes when you recognize something ugly unfolding in real time. Danny had a gift I'd observed my entire childhood, the ability to fail in spectacular ways and somehow end up standing in better sunlight than before. 3 failed businesses, and each time our father found someone else to blame. A divorce, and our mother called his ex-wife difficult. Meanwhile, if I came home with a grade that wasn't exactly right, the entire household treated it like a personal insult to the family name. The inconsistency never stopped stinging. You'd think eventually you'd go numb to it. 2 days after Danny's text, my work phone buzzed while I was leaving a secure conference room at the Pentagon. Unknown internal extension. Major Callahan. Ma'am, this is Special Counsel Warren from Pentagon Legal Affairs. Do you have a moment? That sentence alone is enough to ruin a person's entire week. I stepped into an empty corridor. Yes, sir. A brief pause. Then, your name has surfaced in an ongoing federal procurement investigation involving Callahan Industrial Supply and Logistics out of Ohio. The blood drained from my face, so quickly I felt briefly dizzy. Danny, of course. I pressed my shoulder against the wall. What kind of investigation? Fraudulent representation, connected to defense subcontracting. I closed my eyes. The attorney continued in the flat, professional tone that legal offices cultivate specifically for moments like this one. My brother had reportedly referenced my Pentagon position in multiple vendor recommendation letters. He had claimed, in writing, that I personally vouched for his company's qualifications. I never wrote recommendation letters for my brother, I said quietly. We're aware of that now. Now, that single word sat in the air between us. He sent documents to my work email while we spoke. I opened the first attachment with hands that weren't quite steady. There it was, my forged signature, my rank, my title, a recommendation letter endorsing preferred vendor status for a federal defense subcontract. The formatting was convincing enough that I felt a wave of cold nausea looking at it. Sir, I said, I had absolutely no involvement in this. We understand your position, Major. However, until the investigation concludes, you'll need to avoid any direct communication about these contracts without legal representation present. The hallway felt too warm suddenly. I loosened my collar. What happens if the investigators believe I had prior knowledge? A longer pause this time. You could face clearance suspension pending review. I swallowed hard, and my pension. We're not there yet. Not there yet, enormously comfort. Ding! When the call ended, I stood in that corridor staring at my own forged signature for a full minute. 18 years, deployments, missed holidays, torn cartilage in my left knee that never healed correctly, a marriage that didn't survive the distance, nights I can't fully account for because the work required it. Everything I had built over nearly 2 decades suddenly felt like it was balanced on something very thin. Because Danny wanted to play businessman. That evening, I drove to Colonel Ruiz's home in Arlington. He lived in one of those old brick neighborhoods full of retired military officers and methodically organized garages. His wife brought coffee while he listened from across the kitchen table, completely still, completely focused. When I finished, he sat back and rubbed his jaw slowly. You know what bothers me most? I asked. Tell me. I'm not even surprised. He shook his head. You're not surprised, you're disappointed, those are two different injuries. I looked at him. He nodded toward the newspaper clipping I'd carried in my jacket pocket. In intelligence work, the most dangerous adversary was never the one who came at you from the beginning. The threat is always the one who smiles at you after discovering your value. That sentence landed somewhere deep, not just as operational wisdom, as family history. The flight from Reagan National to Cleveland was delayed almost 90 minutes due to storms stacking up over western Pennsylvania. I sat near the gate eating terrible airport soup, rereading investigation documents on my tablet, until every page felt like a small fresh wound. The forged recommendation letters were worse than I'd initially understood. Danny hadn't merely exaggerated a professional relationship. He had crafted detailed correspondence implying that I personally and actively supported his company's reliability inside the Department of Defense. He had copied language directly from official Army procurement templates. He had used my rank as a credential in federal business dealings. He wasn't stretching the truth. He was impersonating a federal officer. An email arrived from Pentagon Legal while we were somewhere over Ohio. I opened the attachment mid-flight. By the time I landed in Cleveland, my hands were entirely steady, not because I wasn't frightened, but because I had passed through fear into something colder and cleaner on the other side. Clarity. This was not a family visit about reconnecting. Whatever my mother wanted to dress it up as, whatever performance had been planned for the weekend, this gathering existed to get me to protect Danny. And if I wasn't careful, they were prepared to pull me down with him rather than let him face what he'd done. Harrington always looks smaller when I come back. Not literally, the geography hasn't changed, but the proportions shift somehow once you've spent enough years away. The old industrial district looks grayer, more tired. Storefronts sit empty along the main commercial strip. A diner I loved as a teenager had plywood over its windows and a faded for-lease sign in the corner. My parents' split level looked exactly as I remembered it. Same cracked driveway, same basketball hoop with the bent backboard Danny had nearly destroyed in middle school. Same feeling, standing in front of it, that time had decided to pause right here and wait. I sat in the rental car, with the engine running for almost a minute. Then the front door swung open. Elena, my mother hurried down the front walk with her arms already open, smiling with every muscle in her face. She pulled me into a hug that lasted 2 beats longer than felt genuine. "Oh my goodness, look at you," she said, stepping back, hands on my arms, eyes moving up and down the garment bag holding my uniform. "You look so important now." Now. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and lemon furniture polish. The family photographs still lined the staircase in the same order. The wooden cross still hung above the dining room doorway. And on the coffee table, framed in new oak, sat the Pentagon photograph, centered, deliberate, on display. I stared at it for a moment longer than I intended. My father walked in from the kitchen. "There she is," he announced, opening his arms like we were the closest people in the world. "The Pentagon celebrity herself." He kissed the top of my head, and it felt so foreign, so thoroughly rehearsed, that I nearly took a step backward. Danny arrived about an hour later in a Browns hoodie and the relaxed confidence of a man who had genuinely convinced himself that everything was still manageable. That was his particular talent. Danny could stand in the center of a burning structure and spend 20 minutes explaining to everyone else why they were overreacting about the smoke. "There's my favorite federal employee," he said, hugging me. "You only have one." "Exactly my point." He smelled faintly of whiskey under expensive cologne, and under that, CI. Cigarettes he'd tried to cover with both. Dinner that first evening was performance theater. My mother kept the conversation moving through safe territory, church news, neighborhood updates, how Danny's children were doing in school. My father held court near the living room, inviting neighbors over who had somehow all heard I was home and needed to say hello. Randomly. Spontaneously, all at once. At some point, my father introduced me to an older man from the parish. "This is my daughter Alina. She works with the president." I looked at him. "I've never met the president, Dad." "You know what I mean." "I genuinely don't." "Government work, high level," he waved a hand. The neighbor turned to me respectfully. "What branch, if you don't mind?" Before I could answer, my father said proudly, "Military intelligence, basically the Army's spy division." 18 years. He still had no clear picture of what I actually did for a living. That hit somewhere unexpected. Not rage, just the quiet grief of someone recognizing they were never quite seen by the people who were supposed to know them best. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I stood in the bathroom staring at myself under the harsh overhead light. Tired eyes. The particular kind of worn that comes not from too little sleep but from too much carrying. I turned the faucet on so the sound would cover anything that came out. There was an old framed photo by the medicine cabinet. Me and my ex-husband at a military banquet almost 11 years earlier. Jason used to joke that the Army would claim everything useful about me and my family would fight over whatever was left. Turned out my family didn't particularly want whatever was left either. I wiped my face and laughed bitterly at the mirror. 37 years old, major in the United States Army, crying in my childhood bathroom. Some things just never evolve. The next morning, Danny found me on the back patio before anyone else was downstairs. October cold, dead leaves moving across the yard in slow circles. He actually looked nervous. That was new. "I need help," he said. "I know." "Alina, listen." "No, you listen." I kept my voice level. "Pentagon Legal has already contacted me directly. They called my work phone." His face lost color in a way I'd never seen on him before. "They actually called you?" "Yes, and I've read the documents, Danny, all of them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I never meant for it to grow this large." "You forged federal documents." "I borrowed your credibility." I stared at him. "Say that sentence again slowly and tell me you don't hear what it sounds like." He rubbed his forehead. "I was drowning. My business was going under. I needed one contract to stabilize everything, and the vendor relationships weren't coming through on their own. So you forged my signature on Pentagon recommendation letters." I thought. "What, Danny, what exactly did you think?" He leaned forward in his chair. If this falls apart, I lose everything: the house, the company, my kids could. I stood up before he finished that sentence. I knew exactly where it was going. The children, the mortgage, the family. Pull the guilt wire and watch whether it trips. He'd been running that play our entire lives, just with different stakes each time. That afternoon, I walked past the basement stairs carrying laundry and heard my parents' voices floating up from below. My father's voice, clear and certain: "Tell her to sign whatever Danny needs." My mother, quieter: "What if she refuses?" A pause, then my father: "What else does she have? She's divorced, no children, money sitting untouched in her accounts." I stopped moving. My hand tightened on the laundry basket. Then he added the sentence that rearranged something fundamental inside me. "And if she won't cooperate, the family will make sure people understand she turned her back on us when it mattered." I stood there completely still. Not shaking, not crying, not even angry exactly. Just finally, completely, irreversibly clear. They weren't asking me to save Danny. They were asking me to sacrifice myself for Danny, the same way they'd always expected me to make myself smaller so he could seem larger. Except this time, the cost wasn't a deflected compliment or a stolen moment of recognition. This time, it could cost me my clearance, my pension, my career, and potentially my freedom. Before sunrise the next morning, I drove to a gas station on the highway access road, parked under the bright canopy lights, and made a phone call. Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I took one slow breath. "This is Major Alina Callahan. I'm ready to cooperate fully." Sunday dinner at Danny's house started at 4 in the afternoon and somehow already smelled like stale beer by 3:30. Standard operating procedure. His place sat on a cul-de-sac in one of the subdivisions built during the housing bubble years, the ones that went up fast and aged faster. Vinyl S. Iding, oversized trucks in every driveway. Plastic Halloween decorations still on porches 2 weeks after the holiday because removal felt optional. I parked half a block away, sat in the car, watched people carry casserole dishes through the front door. Family gathering, that's what my mother had called it. What it actually was: a room full of witnesses designed to make confrontation uncomfortable and silence easier. I checked the time, then I stepped out of the car in full army dress uniform. The reaction was immediate. Conversations near the garage slowed as I walked up the driveway. My cousin Rachel blinked twice. "Good Lord, Alina, you look official." Apparently, that's my personality now. A few people laughed nervously. Inside, the house looked like every Midwestern family event compressed into one space. Football on the television, aluminum pans of baked pasta on folding tables, beer bottles at every surface, an argument about local politics leaking from the kitchen. My mother rushed over the moment she spotted me. She kissed my cheek and whispered urgently, "Please keep things calm today." Interesting choice of words, as though I were the volatile element in the room. My father stood near the fireplace with a small audience of older men from the parish. When he saw me, his entire posture changed: chest out, chin up, the bearing of a man about to present something he's proud of. "There she is," he announced. "My daughter, Major Alina Callahan, Cyber Operations, Pentagon." He'd learned the phrase recently, obviously practiced it. One of the men shook my hand solemnly. "Thank you for your service, Major." That phrase, strangers say it with more genuine feeling than my own family ever managed unprompted. Danny appeared from the kitchen carrying a beer and grinning just slightly too wide. "There's my sister," he said, loud enough for the room. "Probably the most important person in the entire Defense Department." That's genuinely not true. Humble as always, he kept talking before I could redirect. "You should hear what she works on: high-level stuff, real national security territory." I noticed the thin line of perspiration at his hairline. He was performing for the room, desperately, skillfully, and underneath the performance he was absolutely terrified. Good. Dinner lasted over an hour. The television stayed loud. Kids ran through the hallway. People passed dishes around and talked about sports and weather and the price of everything. All the while, Danny kept steering conversations toward business, future contracts, supplier relationships, the patience required in government work. Each time he said the word connections, he let his eyes drift toward me, applying pressure, silently, in front of everyone. At some point, my mother leaned close and whispered, "Maybe after the meal, you and Danny can sort through the situation privately." "You mean cover for him privately?" Her smile dissolved. My father eventually raised his beer bottle to make a toast. "I just want to say something real quick." The room settled. Families go through hard patches, everybody does. But seeing Alina in that newspaper last month, seeing our name connected to something that important, he shook his head slowly, looking genuinely moved. It reminded me what we're capable of as a family. Murmurs of agreement around the table. And something inside me finally released, not emotionally, but strategically. Because in that moment, watching my father perform Pride for an audience he'd assembled specifically to create pressure, I understood the entire architecture of what was happening. They didn't want truth. They wanted the maintenance of comfort. They wanted Danny's reputation protected, their standing at the parish protected, their self-image protected, and they expected me to be the load-bearing wall in a structure I hadn't agreed to hold up. I set my fork down. There's something everyone in this room should probably hear. The table went quiet faster than I expected. Danny's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I stood. 3 weeks ago, I said, keeping my voice entirely level, I contacted the Defense Criminal Investigative Service regarding fraudulent documents connected to Danny's company. The silence that followed was total. You could hear the football game from the other room with perfect clarity. Danny forced a laugh. "Okay, let's all just." I opened the folder I'd carried in and placed the printed documents on the table. Forged recommendation letters. My signature, copied without my knowledge. Pentagon letterhead. Official language, all of it. Relatives leaned forward to read. My mother's face went white. My father stared at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't recognize. Danny stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You went behind my back. You forged federal documents. I was trying to survive. You used my name to commit fraud. You're my sister." There it was, that word, Deppel. Oiled like a weapon, precisely when everything else had failed, as though the fact of blood relation was supposed to overwrite the fact of what he'd done. "Then why are you doing this to us?" He spread his hands to include the entire room. I kept my voice quiet. Even. Because I spent 18 years building a career while this family treated it as something mildly embarrassing. Because you used my name, my rank, without my knowledge to deceive federal agencies. And because if I stayed silent, I would be legally complicit in what you did. My father slammed his palm on the table. "That's enough." I turned to face him slowly. "You've had enough chances, Dad. Every single one of us has had enough chances at something better." My mother was crying quietly. Real tears, I could tell the difference after a lifetime of calibrating. That part almost reached me. Almost. Then the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. It rang again. Danny's expression had collapsed entirely. Whatever composure he'd been maintaining for the last 2 hours was simply gone. I walked to the front door and opened it. 2 DCIS investigators stood on the porch. Beside them, an IRS agent in a dark coat. Professional, calm, no dramatic staging, no television-style raid jackets, just quiet authority and paperwork and the weight of consequences. The lead investigator nodded. "Major Callahan, thank you for facilitating this." Behind me, the entire house had gone completely still. The children peeked from the hallway, the older relatives sat frozen. Danny looked physically ill. The investigator stepped inside with measured composure. "Mr. Daniel Callahan." Danny didn't answer. And then my father, who had not said a single useful word across the entire weekend, finally found his voice. "You embarrassed this family," he said, low, furious, directed entirely at me. The words hung in the room. I looked at him, not with anger, I'd spent that already. Not with grief, I'd spent that 2 years ago in parking garages and airport terminals and childhood bathrooms. I looked at him with something that had no name. That was just the end of a very long road. No, Dad, I said quietly. I brought this family the one thing nobody here ever thought to give me. He stared. The truth. Nobody spoke. Not Danny, not my mother, not my father, not one of the relatives sitting around that dinner table with their untouched food going cold. And standing there in my dress uniform while the federal investigators quietly began their work behind me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not victory. Freedom. I left Harrington before sunrise the following morning. No goodbye, no note. I loaded my overnight bag into the rental car while the November wind pushed dead leaves in slow spirals across my parents' driveway. The neighborhood was still dark except for one porch light across the street and the faint red glow of St. Catherine's, sign visible above the roofline a few blocks away. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, looking at my childhood home. The split level looked smaller than I remembered. Older, tired. So did my parents, honestly. And that was the part nobody warns you about when you spend years protecting yourself from your own family. One day you look up and realize they grew old while you were busy surviving them. The kitchen light flickered on upstairs. My mother, probably. I almost went back inside. Then my phone lit up. Message from the lead investigator, confirming coordination details. That settled it. I started the engine. The sun was barely clearing the horizon over the interstate when I stopped at a rest area outside Canton for coffee. My knees ached from the early drive. Rain moving in again, the gray, permanent-feeling kind of Ohio morning that convinces you winter has already decided to stay. I stood near the vending machines, drinking terrible coffee from a paper cup, and noticed something strange. My chest wasn't tight. For weeks, months, honestly, I had carried a pressure so constant I'd stopped noticing it. Fear and guilt and anger all compressed together into something heavy and shapeless. Now there was only exhaustion. Clean exhaustion. The kind that comes not from damage but from completion. Like finishing something that was always going to be hard, no matter how long you waited. The fallout moved slowly, the way federal cases do. Danny called me 17 times over the following month. I didn't answer any of them. Some voicemails were furious. Some were crying. A few tried guilt with the practiced precision of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding exactly which wires to pull. Mom hasn't slept in weeks. The kids keep asking where I am. You destroyed an entire family over paperwork. That last one, paperwork, only Danny could look at federal fraud charges and describe them as a filing issue. His attorney, eventually, advised him to stop contacting me. 4 months later, Danny accepted a plea agreement related to fraudulent business representation and falsified federal procurement documentation. 3 years in federal prison. His company dissolved before sentencing. His employees were gone within weeks. His third wife filed for divorce 6 months after that. Back in Harrington, the story spread the way stories always spread in close parish communities, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. My father stepped back from the church fundraisers he'd always organized. My mother kept attending Sunday Mass, but started sitting near the back rather than the front rows she'd occupied for 30 years. I didn't celebrate any of it. I want to be clear about that, because people assume this kind of outcome must feel like vindication. It doesn't. It just feels sad in a way that's hard to articulate, because the people who failed you and the people who once took care of you are, in these cases, often exactly the same people. The hands that let you down are the same ones that drove you to the doctor when you were small and frightened. That grief is real, and it doesn't resolve neatly. Anyone who tells you otherwise has never actually been through it. By January, I had moved fully into a townhouse in Alexandria. Quiet neighborhood, brick sidewalks, retired federal workers in half the coffee shops, talking about back surgeries and pension adjustments and government contracting timelines. I fit there in a way I'd never fit in Harrington. For the first time I could actually remember, my home felt peaceful. Not the absence of noise, the absence of anticipation. No ambient guilt. No emotional tripwire waiting behind the next phone call. No performance required just to walk through my own door. One Saturday afternoon, I unpacked my dress uniform carefully and hung it in the hallway closet. Then I placed a small potted plant on the windowsill, a snake plant, maybe $15 from the garden center down the block. I stood looking at that plant in the afternoon light for longer than made sense. Everything in this home was mine. Every quiet hour, every piece of furniture, every decision about how to spend a Saturday. Nobody was waiting to collect on my life anymore. A few weeks later, I drove across town to see Marcus. He opened the door in sweatpants and an army crewneck that was old enough to have served its own tour. "You look terrible," he said immediately. "Nice to see you too." He grunted and waved me inside. We sat in his garage workshop with the rain tapping softly against the metal door and coffee going cold on the workbench between us. I told him everything. The investigation, Danny, the dinner, the federal investigators at the door, the drive home before dawn. All of it. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he stared down at his coffee for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You did the right thing." I looked away, didn't feel right, felt lonely. He was quiet for a beat. Then, "The problem with honorable things is they usually hurt." That sentence cracked something open in me that I'd been holding closed for weeks. I cried, not dramatically, just the quiet, exhausted kind that comes when you've been holding yourself together for too long and finally put something down. Marcus pretended not to notice, which was exactly the right thing to do. My mother left voicemails for months. Some were apologetic, some were manipulative, sometimes both at once, braided together so skillfully I had to listen twice to identify which was which. One message: "Your father's blood pressure has been very poor since all of this happened." Another: "We only ever did the best we could." That second one bothered me the most, because sometimes we did our best is entirely true and still not enough. Both things can be real at the same time. I've had to make peace with that. In the spring, I wrote her a letter, 3 pages, no raised voice, no accusations, no catalog of injuries. I told her I loved her genuinely, without condition. I told her I hoped she stayed well. And I told her that I would no longer participate in relationships where love only materialized when someone needed something from me. Then I wished her peace. I sealed the envelope, walked it to the mailbox at the end of the street, and didn't look back. Last October, almost a full year after everything happened, I was walking through Old Town Alexandria on a cold, clear afternoon when I passed a group of older women veterans sitting outside a cafe. Different branches, different decades, different lives. Gray hair, comfortable shoes, the kind of laughter that carries because it's genuinely earned. One of them caught me looking and raised her coffee cup in my direction. I smiled back. And standing there, under orange autumn trees, with traffic moving slowly down the street behind me, I understood something I wish I'd grasped years earlier. I was never actually alone, not really. For most of my adult life, I had confused endurance with strength. I thought that continuing to absorb damage from people who shared my last name was some form of loyalty. That absorbing it without complaint was proof of character. It wasn't. Strength can also look like walking away, quietly, without drama, simply choosing not to keep returning to the same fire expecting not to get burned. I didn't win against my family. That's not how this story ends. There was no trophy. There was no moment of complete reckoning where everyone understood everything and said the right things. I just finally, permanently, stopped losing to them. If you've spent years reaching for love from people who only offered it when it served them, if you've built something real with your own hands while the people closest to you looked right past it, then you already understand everything I just told you. And if you stayed with me until the end of the story, I want you to know something. Whatever you've earned, whatever you've built, whatever rank or milestone or quiet victory you've claimed in the dark when no one else was watching. That was yours. It was always just yours. And that turns out to be more than enough.